Welcome to Teaching Truth. Stones of Destiny. That's the theme for our reflections this week as we dig into the narrative of Acts chapter 6 and 7. The narrative which records for us the stoning of Stephen. Stephen, who was the first Christian martyr. These stones like this one, which were hurled at Stephen, determined his destiny. The stones like this one, which pummeled Stephen's bruised body, determined his destiny. And in our reflections today, we want to think about the people who decided upon Stephen's destiny, who decided that Stephen was destined to be killed by stoning. Who were those people? Well, those people were the Sanhedrin. What was the Sanhedrin? Well, the Sanhedrin was a group of elders who adjudicated on that which was lawful and on that which in their mind was unlawful. The word Sanhedrin comes from the Greek word sitting together. And so as these elders sat together, they heard and they saw Stephen. And Stephen, being just a little bit smarter than they were, creates within them a resentment. And they begin to orchestrate, they begin to argue, they begin to create a revolt against the ministry and the work of Stephen. I suspect that few of them in the Sanhedrin that day knew what they were actually doing by doing that. And only God can take the intentions of men and women who are destined to put to death anything that is to do with the gospel or anything that is to do with Jesus. It's only God that can then order providence in such a way that actually what they do serves the greater good and the purpose and the extension of the gospel. The Sanhedrin would never have had done what they did had they known that the God whom Stephen witnessed to could actually take their negative and turn it into a tremendous positive, as we'll discover later this week in our reflections. Stephen is charged with the sin of blasphemy. And that only meant one thing. It meant the death penalty. It was the sin that saw you being taken outside the city wall. It was the sin that resulted in the henchmen coming in, and the sin which resulted in stones being gathered and piled together, ready for the accused to be punished and to be put to death. And so while Stephen is giving answer to everything that he has been charged for, in the mind of many in the Sanhedrin that day, they've already made up their mind. They've already sanctioned his death by stoning. And there are stones, heavy stones, being piled up outside the court, ready to be thrown at this man, full of the Holy Spirit, this man of God, Stephen. Stones that would determine Stephen's destiny. And yet, as Stephen is on trial before the Sanhedrin, we notice one very interesting and indeed significant fact about Stephen. His face was like that of an angel. Now, what that might mean, I simply don't know. But Luke, as he writes and records this for us, I believe wishes us to be aware that Stephen stood before his accusers not like a deer caught in the headlights on a country lane at night. No. Stephen didn't have that panic look of surprise or was he startled, but rather, in Stephen's face being like that of an angel, as he stands before the Sanhedrin, there is something going on in the inner life of Stephen, in that he's able to give a composed and almost God-given expression to those to whom he is speaking. His face was like that of an angel. The high priest asked the question, are these charges true? And then Stephen gives his speech to the Sanhedrin. Well, that speech certainly stirred up a revolt, because by the time we get to verse 54, those in the Sanhedrin were furious and they were gnashing their teeth at him. They wanted him out. They wanted him put to death. Gnashing your teeth in the sense that Luke describes means there was no small amount of rabble. There was a sense of vengeance, a sense that Stephen had gone far too far for their liking. You see, they had thought that Stephen had trashed all their traditions. It was repulsive, the thought that he was doing that. And this particular Sanhedrin, they had built a life and a system of religious belief on the basis of what they think God had done and was doing, and the indignity in their mind, in this Sanhedrin, of this young upstart from Jerusalem, this young Jewish convert to Jesus, who had done miraculous signs and who had been preaching and teaching and whom God had worked through, has really got up their back. And they see Stephen as someone who's trashing everything they've come to believe is true. Whereas in actual fact, Stephen is reading the events of Israel's history from a place of valuing Jesus as the Messiah and fulfillment of the promise that was given to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so as Stephen stands before the Sanhedrin, I'm sure aware of what was coming to him. I suspect too that he was very aware of the teachings of Christ in relation to the persecutions that would come upon those who decide to live for Jesus Christ. May we, like Stephen, be prepared to take our stand, however difficult, against whatever type of Sanhedrin we may bump up against.